Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Lucinda Rouse.
And I'm Andy Ricketts. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings-on in the charity world. And this week we'll be talking about the importance of co-creation in charity leadership and programming.
That's right. Co-creation is now something of a voluntary sector buzzword, and for good reason. It implies equity between charity staff and service users, something that has historically been lacking in this sector. And after all, why wouldn't you embed the insights and experiences of the people your charity exists to support at the very centre of your culture and strategy? But how does it work in practice? And how can you remain true to your co-creation values as your organisation scales? Sister System is a London-based charity that provides mentorship and other forms of support for girls and young women aged 13 to 24 who have been affected by the care system. It was founded 7 years ago in association with 17 young women who had been in care, meaning co-creation has been an important element of how the charity runs since day one. And we're delighted to be joined by Okela Douglas-Norgrove, the charity's founder and chief executive. Hi, Okela.
Hi. Lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's lovely to have you with us. So lots of questions have just been posed by me, but let's start with a basic one. What is your understanding of co-creation?
So I think for me, co-creation and the founding of Sister System was all about acknowledging the people that your charity exists to serve as experts and as decision makers in order to be able to provide a service that is authentically impactful for the people or purpose that your charity is seeking to serve. Co-creation to me is about enabling and empowering your organisation from the bottom down to ensure that the people and purpose that engage with you see themselves and hear themselves in each element of the work that you're doing. And so they can engage effectively and willingly as well. And so that it has a real tangible impact. So it's about providing them with a platform that is, as I said, going to lead to greater impact for them, but also for your organisation. It means creating a culture within your organisation that is going to drive your purpose through a lens of equity and kind of navigating alongside your people and purpose what that equity needs to look like, and together navigating through the complexities that come with co-creation.
On a sort of daily basis, then, what does that mean for you as a charity in terms of how you actually apply that and the extent to which you have service users involved in the decisions that you're making as a charity?
The journey of co-creation began with just 17 care leavers and continued on through that initial delivery. With some of our later programs, we're now at a place where we will consult with the young people and who are now members of our team and members of our staff, and also sit across our youth advisory board. So that's now the mechanism that we use to continue evolving and continue to make sure that that is at the heart of the work that we're doing. It's about acknowledging them as experts, acknowledging that the purpose and the people that you're working towards in your mission are the experts to help you to achieve authentic and impactful change in their lives and in community and society, and doing that by ensuring that they come on the journey with you through all parts of your organisation. So from your governance to your operations to your safeguarding processes and policies to the culture of your organisation, all of those things, they need to see themselves and hear themselves and be part of those decision-making processes, which is about also then power dynamics and ensuring that that is looked at very carefully, and that when you're working in this way of co-creation, that you're also honest and transparent that power dynamics will exist within that framework, and together trying to navigate through those in a way that's equitable.
How do you sort of strike the balance between how much you involve service users, or is it that you're involving them in everything?
Yes, I mean, this has been part of the lessons that we've learned as we've grown, is asking ourselves exactly to what end and why. And I think it's about being reflective, particularly in leadership roles, and thinking it through very carefully according to your strategic development and your scale up. And ultimately, authentic co-creation should be about seeking to have that voice and that influence throughout all arms of your organization. But in real terms, what does that then look like? It looks like mobilizing things like a youth advisory board who can be involved in those strategic decision making. It involves employing the people that have taken part in programs and giving them positions within your organization where they can influence the program delivery, where they can influence what policy looks like, where they're part of reviewing some of those systems and processes that you are building in order to be able to deliver an authentic, impactful service. And so would they be involved at every decision making? Absolutely not. In the same way that your wider staff team wouldn't be involved in every decision, but it is about always keeping that at the heart of what you're doing and acknowledging them as an asset, as your strength, as your expertise, as your USP in some ways, and ensuring that the right spaces within your organization, from governance down to delivery, and most importantly as well, looking at impact and having them involved in looking at what your impact is, which can open up forums and spaces that challenge leadership and challenge an organization, but ultimately are going to drive you towards being incredibly impactful and being able to see that both in your qualitative and quantitative data that you should always be obviously monitoring and sharing back to your beneficiaries and looking together at what needs to be adapted. And so some of the practical things that we now do at Sister System is yearly reflection of programs and processes and systems and looking at what needs to be tweaked. And those things are built into our strategy, they're built into our budget, acknowledging that this is an organizational approach and not a tokenistic element of what you're doing.
Interesting to hear about the Youth Advisory Board and your emphasis on governance and the importance of including the perspective of your service users in that governance aspect. How about the Trustee Board? Do you have present or past service users on your Board of Trustees?
Yes, we have had Big Sisters, which is some of the language that we use specifically at Sister System, who have joined the board. Now that we have grown, we have made a strategic decision along with them that for the next 3 years, the focus around co-creation will actually come from the Youth Advisory Board, because it gives them more flexibility and fluidity, and it also acknowledges the different levels of responsibility and accountability when you're looking at the governance structure of your organization. So for the next 3 years of our strategic development, it will be the Youth Advisory Board working alongside the Board of Trustees that will ensure that we're discharging our strategy through that co-created lens, as opposed to having a big sister sitting on the board.
I love that title, Big Sister. Could you just tell us briefly who they are and what they do?
Yes, sure. So, Sister Systems, Big Sisters are girls and young women that have successfully completed all stages of our program and graduated with all 3 qualifications, and they go on to become Big Sisters. And that means that they are employed by the organisation in 2 of our 4 exit pathways, and one of those is as a youth advisory board member, and the other one is as a paid member of our team, working, as I said, across all strands of our organisation. So we have a big sister who sits in operations, a big sister that sits in communications, one that sits in fundraising, and then someone that sits in our programmes delivery. And it's really built on the premise of it takes a village to raise a child. And it comes from those original co-creation think tank sessions, where what we were really hearing was that what these girls and young women needed was a big sister. And so they do a program that's called The Big Sister You Never Had. That then means that they become big sisters. And in that way, they cascade what they've learned down to the younger girls and women that are on programs and can walk with them throughout their program. But it also gives them that sense of status and elevation within the organisation in terms of a job role and a title.
And have you made any unexpected discoveries about the way that you work from this use of co-creation? I think that often we assume that we know best in terms of being experts in the areas that we work, and maybe charity professionals might sometimes fall into that trap. But I just wondered if there are times when you've been surprised by some of the feedback or some of the directions that you've taken because of the involvement of your service users in the co-creation process.
Yes, absolutely. I think the biggest challenge is navigating the power dynamics and building trust between leadership and service users. And I think really what was a surprise for us was the way in which we needed to accept and acknowledge that there is still a power dynamic that comes with a set of boundaries between you and the people that you're co-creating with, and acknowledging that you will be challenged, and challenged in a way in which kind of your traditional staff body might not challenge you at a leadership level. But I think for me, that's where the magic happens. If in leadership you are open to being challenged, which I certainly have been, and everyone at leadership has been, and quite rightly so. If you're acknowledging people as experts, then you have to empower them to have a authentic voice, which means that they will challenge the decisions that you have made. And whilst acknowledging and respecting boundaries and that power dynamic, you have to together navigate what that looks like. And you have to also be then careful but very honest with your service users around how together you navigate that power dynamic. It's about managing expectations. It's about looking and accepting that there isn't always equity when it comes to decision making, that even though you're acknowledging them as experts, when you think about co-creation, in some ways it does create that conflict when you're looking at the power dynamic. And because it presents a framework of equity, but within that equity, you still have a power dynamic. For example, when you're thinking about safeguarding or when you're thinking about information sharing, it's absolutely crucial that you're in a position in leadership, that you're open to that, and that you can provide honest and accurate answers and information as to why ultimately there are some things that will still feel like decisions are being made from a power place as opposed to equity within that.
Could you give an example of maybe a process or an exercise that you've undertaken to navigate that power dynamic issue and make sure that you sustain the trust of your service users as you work with them in co-creating your programs?
A really nice example would be actually when we developed the strategy that we've just launched. Our big sisters were heavily involved in that process. And it created some conflict in the process, and it created challenge in the process, because as leadership and governance, we're always on a mission to ensure that as many people as possible can benefit from the service and the charitable mission that you were on. When you involve your service users, they have a real sense of ownership, and quite rightly so. They've been part of creating the organisation and getting it to where it is. But that can create a sense of wanting to own it and having, I guess, a fear or an anxiety of scale up. And so for Sister System, when we went on the journey of looking at our strategy, and there was, from a leadership perspective, this thirst to meet the increasing demand that we see out there and that we see across the charity sector. There's huge demand for the work that we do in the charity sector at the moment. And then if you're looking through a co-creation lens at how you scale up, the challenge that we were met with was actually those big sisters saying, but we don't want to scale up. We don't want this to change. We don't want to do this all across London. This is ours. We finally have something that is for us and where we see ourselves and we hear ourselves. So I think that was very challenging for us to take those young women on the journey with us and to have them really believe that they are as important today as they were 5 years ago, as they were last year, and that they will not become lost in this. So we'd have conversations around things like, me being challenged that you're just going to become another charity that's actually part of the problem, that's not authentic, that isn't hearing us, that isn't seeing us. How are you going to be able to deliver the same depth and quality and impact of service to thousands of young people when at the moment we're working on a smaller scale? But actually, for as much as that created challenge in those spaces, it led to really deep, meaningful thinking and really careful decision making that I think if that voice wasn't in the room, and if that voice didn't trust me and us to be that honest and challenge us at that time, we wouldn't have been able to really think about that as a risk, right? When you're thinking about strategies and you're looking at your risk, and it's about funding and reputation and your ecosystem, actually your biggest risk is losing the trust of the people that you exist to serve. And so out of that challenge came us being able to identify an additional risk and think about how we mitigate that. And look, we haven't always got it right. We've got things wrong. And as a result, we have lost trust of some of the young people that we worked with through that lens. And I think that's, again, part of accepting, if you're going to be a genuinely co-created organisation, that you can't take everyone with you at every stage of your strategy and every stage of your delivery.
Yeah, sounds like a difficult balancing act between growing and retaining those core values, which comes from being a grassroots organisation before you even registered as a charity, right?
Absolutely challenging on all levels, when you're trying to balance head and heart and think about your purpose, but also think about the business and the strategy. Would I change anything? Absolutely not. Because ultimately it's about the culture that you foster and embed, and it's about building yourself and your organization as one that will be resilient to challenge and to change, which is part of growth. It's part of delivering against your strategy. It's not comfortable. Co-creation forces you to get comfortable with things that you might feel a bit uncomfortable with in a more traditional framework and a more traditional way of working.
You mentioned your strategy and cited that as an example of a way in which you've remained true to your values and a way of flagging potential risks by your service users and making sure that you considered them along the way. Just wondered if you could take us through practically how you developed your strategy in that co-creation mindset for any other charity that's thinking, okay, we want to really involve our service users more in that strategy process. How did you go about it?
So we went about it by ensuring that they were part of everything that we did with our strategy development. So, and I think this is applicable to a charity of any size in terms of how they can really embed it into their strategy. So what we did was really practical things. So we made sure that when we were running workshops to think about the strategy, they were invited along to attend those workshops. They were, given all of the right kind of skill and knowledge and behavior acquisition prior to that, so that they could sit in that space with people that were in quite senior positions as well as externals. When you're delivering a strategy, you'd quite often have external consultants involved in the work as well. So it was about prepping and preparing in quite a small, intimate setting with your service users, and then bringing them into that space so that the strategic development for Sister System was actually done through a series of workshops that our big sisters were invited to according to the role that they were playing within the organisation, and also according to what we knew their hopes and dreams and worries were for our strategic direction. So that was really how we went around doing it. And we also made sure that we gave enough time to sense check decisions that were being made, and to make sure that there was enough time built into, your team meetings or whatever environment you're looking at to be able to pull together your strategy. If they're not already paid members of your team, that you're acknowledging them almost as a consultant in what you're doing. And so therefore, for me, and I think across the sector, it's becoming increasingly more recognized that our service users are the asset in what we do, and to not include them in things like your strategy development in really practical ways and in ways in which they are remunerated properly and it's not tokenistic is really important. Yes, it meant that our strategy possibly took longer to develop and to sign off on than if we had followed a traditional framework, but it was non-negotiable for us at Sister System that this is the way that we had to do it. And it's also about making sure that in those spaces, there's faces that they recognize, there's people that they feel comfortable with, that it's a safe space for them, it's an accessible space for them, and that they can be involved in your strategy in ways that feel meaningful to them, and that you're doing those kind of reflective feedback loops as well.
You mentioned time, and that this sometimes means that things take longer than they might otherwise. Also, money. In order to not be tokenistic, you have to reimburse them appropriately, meaning
Sure.
that this kind of process, and indeed your entire operations, must be more expensive than they might otherwise be.
Oh, yes.
How are your funders receptive or not to this way of working?
So I think increasingly more so than 7-8 years ago when we began this journey, co-creation was not being done. It was something that was felt to be incredibly complex, something that was felt to be very idealistic. For us, the only way to do it was to do it in this way. And so we have been very intentional about the ecosystem and the stakeholders that we've built around us across the last 7 years. Now it's becoming, as you said at the top of the interview, it's a buzzword in the sector. It's best practice, it's a go-to, it's the model that everybody, charities quite rightly are looking to embed and weave into their organizations. It means that when you put together your annual or 3-year or 5-year budget, you must acknowledge the resources and the time and the remuneration that you need to build in so that it's authentic and it happens throughout the organization. Our funders at Sister System, as I said, it's about taking them on that journey with you. It's about demonstrating that you are experts as an organization, being open to being challenged by funders, but also challenging back, right? For Sister System, and I think for lots of organizations across the sector, we increasingly realize that in order to achieve our impact, co-creation is where that begins. And so if a funder wants to fund authentic impact, they should be funding co-creation, and they should be funding organizations that seek to work in that way. And they should be supporting charitable organizations through a funding lens to make sure that the work isn't tokenistic, to make sure that when we say things like we acknowledge them as the expert, we acknowledge them as an asset, that is also reflected in the organization's budget and in the way in which you remunerate the beneficiaries that you want to make a commitment to you. And so for us, it's about having those open, honest and challenging conversations with funders. This is where impact genuinely, authentically happens and is deeper and is longer lasting.
Are there any funders that you found to be particularly receptive to this approach?
Yes, actually, we interestingly around 2020, so when the pandemic hit and when all the campaigning for Black Lives Matter, we had a number of funders who were incredibly supportive and really leaned in to co-creation and understood the complexities of that journey, and that therefore your cost per head or your annual income target is going to be higher. We had a number of trusts and foundations and grant makers that were really excited and enthused and wanted to get behind the work that we were doing because of the co-creation sitting at the heart of that.
And has that appetite been sustained since life returning to normal post-COVID?
Watch this space, I think, is probably the answer to that. In terms of core funders and some of the larger funders that we have, yes, I think that it has done, but there is always the worry in the sector, right? That was the kind of fashionable thing to fund at the time, and something new is going to come along. We're very hopeful that because of the data and the impact that it demonstrates to funders, that you don't need to convince them so much anymore, right? There are now so many organisations in the sector that are working in this way and demonstrating impact in this way, whether it's through storytelling or whether it's through their impact data, and being able to demonstrate to funders and the wider sector the difference that this is making. We're very hopeful and have had commitments from across trust foundations, and also really significantly corporate partnerships and corporate foundations who absolutely see the value in this and see the value in funding organisations who want to deliver within a framework of co-creation.
Are there any funders, trusts or foundations, corporate partners that you'd be willing to name check as particularly progressive in this field?
Yes, I think that Impetus, who have been on the journey with Sister System for 3 years now, have been incredible and incredibly supportive, and all of the co-investment that you get through a partnership with Impetus, such as CD&R, which has really leaned into Sister System, KPMG, Salesforce, the Lloyds Bank Foundation, all big corporate supporters, AXA Foundation, big corporate supporter of Sister System, trusts and foundations and grant makers, Impact 100, incredibly supportive. Also, Esme Fairburn, Paul Hamlin, City Bridge. So across the sector, but I'm probably missing some out. So
I very much put you on the spot with that. So disclaimer, if you're a great funder that Okela hasn't mentioned, please don't take it personally.
Absolutely. And I think, just to add, it's about being brave and bold from a fundraising perspective within your applications and within those due diligence conversations, to have the conversation and to push back and to explain, and to also be brave and bold as an organisation that we are experts in this, and the people that we exist to serve are the experts in this, and the funders are there to enable and empower us to do this work. And I think it is about also addressing the inequities that sit within organisations and funders, and being brave enough as an organisation to say, actually, we're the experts in this. And if you want to empower and enable great work, then fund the work, right? And then that can set a platform to also begin having conversations with funders about the inequities that exist, and how together actually we're all wanting the same impact, but asking a funder to acknowledge you and your organisation and the way that you work as the expert in what you're doing.
So just as a final question to you, given this journey that you've been on for the past 7 years plus, of making sure that co-creation is embedded in everything that you do as an organisation and reflected in the culture, in the operations, in the governance and so on, what would your number one learning be from those past 7+ years?
So I think number one learning would be to build it into your processes and policies and systems at the very beginning of your work. So really building it into everything that creates the foundations of the organisation, and doing it very intentionally and through the lens of it doesn't all need to be done at once. So being careful and considered and intentional around how you're building those processes, those policies, those systems, your recruitment. Yeah, because that is what is going to lay the foundation for your people to foster the culture that you need in order to be able to genuinely deliver co-creation without compromising on quality. And that's where you begin to see a framework of equity really beginning to mobilise.
Well, Okela, it's been really great to speak to you and to find out about Sister System's journey. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Okela, and that's it for this week. We'll be continuing the co-creation theme next week, when we'll be joined by 2 guests to talk about their work co-designing a campaign about water safety with the young people it's aimed at. But for now, from Andy and me and everyone at Third Sector, thank you so much for listening. Our producer is Till Owen.